Welcome back, everybody. And you know, I wanted to do this program today just in an effort to help you understand what's going on in America, who's really running America, and to ask you not to go to sleep at the wheel. A lot of us were praying, and I was praying that God's will would be done last evening. And I'm certainly glad how it turned out, right? I mean, just going to be honest here. But it does not mean that I can say, okay, throw my hands up, wow, we got that done, and throw Trump to the wolves. Because I'm telling you, this 4 years, he's going to try to do some things that are going to go right in the face of the establishment. And so he's going to need God's hand upon him. He said last night, I believe that God kept me alive for a certain purpose. I heard his son, Eric Trump, give a speech a couple weeks ago. He said the same thing. I believe God has kept my dad alive for a certain purpose. And it appears to be so. But I wanted you to understand really what's going on behind the scenes. Who really runs America? Now, at the end of the day, I believe God's in control. But the Bible says Satan's building the kingdom here on the earth. There's two kingdoms being built. Satan's building the kingdom, God's building the kingdom. I got to be part of God's kingdom, everybody. I want you to be part of God's kingdom. But if you're not in God's kingdom, you're helping to build Satan's kingdom. You say, but I'm not a bad person. I get that. But still, you're either at the end of time, you're either in God's kingdom or you're in Satan's. It's one or the other. And when a person wins a soul, they're taking people out of Satan's kingdom and putting them in God's kingdom. So, back to my question, who's running the country? What does Donald Trump face day one when he gets in office? He's already faced it for 4 years, but it looks like it's going to be worse this time because he's going to try to do some much bigger, more aggressive things. So, the Rothschilds and different things, all these, they started funding industrialists here in the United States, and it was in that fashion that the Rothschilds' Masonic interest would gain a foothold in the administration of the United States of America's finances. Both the Warburgs and the Kuhn-Loeb, Kuhn-Loeb Financial Institution, they would later become principal stockholders in the Federal Reserve Bank, with Paul Warburg becoming the first chairman of the Federal Reserve Board. Through their U.S., and what I'm doing here is I'm going through some excerpts from Gary Kah's book, En route to Global Occupation. Very, very good book. So through their United States and European agents, the Rothschilds would go on to finance the Rockefeller Standard Oil dynasty and the Carnegie Steel Empire, as well as the Harriman Railroad system. The Rockefellers, who later became intermarried with the Carnegies, and a lot of these families have done that. They've intermarried their children, so it stays in like a huge bloodline. Now, you've heard about this before and thought, oh, that's conspiracy theory. Like Gary Kah said on the program the other day, the old conspiracy theories are now today's headlines. Think of it. Now, not all of them. I don't believe Bigfoot's out running around in the woods somewhere. I don't know. He might be. I've never seen him, but that's neither here nor there. But I'm just saying, some of these old conspiracy theories that are out there that they want you to believe is a conspiracy theory, many of them are becoming today's headlines, right? The Rockefellers later became intermarried with the Carnegies, marrying their kids together. In other words, they didn't want somebody from way out coming and just getting married into the family and, hey, taking part of the dynasty. No. They intermarried. And they would go on to finance many of America's leading capitalists through Chase Manhattan and Citibank, both of which have long been Rockefeller family banks. Many of these capitalist families would also become intermarried with the Rockefellers, so that by 1937, one could trace an almost unbroken line of biological relationships from the Rockefellers through one half of the wealthiest 60 families in America. So, owing much of their wealth to the Rockefellers, these families have become loyal allies of, let's say, quote unquote, the family. And the Rockefellers, on the other hand, they owed much of their colossal fortune to the Rothschilds. And they have, for the most part, remained loyal to them and their European interest. So as a result of this huge chain here, much of America's corporate wealth is ultimately traceable to the old money of Europe and one of the world's interests of Freemasonry. Yes, there is a global establishment, and this is it. This is why I'm not worried about if BRICS being successful, because they're trying to start some parallel New World Order opposed to this one. Never going to happen. Never going to happen. So, ever since the founding of the Federal Reserve System, consistent efforts have been made by conservative congressional leaders to put a stop to the Fed and the forces behind it, with each decade producing at least one valiant attempt to expose the conspiracy. I'm not going to go through it all today, but there have been many people that have lost their lives trying to do something about the Fed, a central bank in America, the establishment. There have been many people in politics that have ended in a plane crash, or they were poisoned, or you read Gary Koss's book, and it's just one thing right after another where people, they just take them out. Now you know what Donald Trump has been facing during the election. They're pulling out all stops to keep him from getting elected. Now that it appears that he's got elected, you say, well, they'll stop. Well, what do you think the chances of that are? Donald Trump is doing many things that are trying to pull down the house of cards around them. So, Revelation 13 talks about a world government, the politics, religion, and the economic system. I just went through some of the economic system. The Rothschilds, the Rockefellers, Kuhn Loeb, the Schiffs, the Warburgs, many of these families that have been controlling the economy. They started the Federal Reserve, right? The Federal Reserve is our central bank in America, and that, along with the Biden administration and the rest of the establishment, they're the ones that are talking about implementing a central bank digital. The Federal Reserve is our central bank. They're putting out going eventually cashless. They'd like to, and go to a complete digital platform and push a central bank digital currency. However, that's the economic thing. The Federal Reserve, Ron Paul has been against the Federal Reserve for years. They've never been audited. It's a cartel of private bankers. They're the establishment, or part of it, the economic wing of it. They're the ones running the government. The government's not running the Federal Reserve. The government can't do anything to the Federal Reserve. But Donald Trump said, as long as I'm president, we won't have a central bank digital currency. You see what I'm saying? He's coming at the financial institution in America, the establishment. But it's global. The Bank for International Settlements, located in Basel, Switzerland, that's the hub for all the central banks. That's how they're controlling the economies of the world. But if you've never read some of these books or done a deep dive into some of this stuff, in high school and college, I had a kid come to my office one time and try to tell me that he just graduated with an economics degree, and he said, oh, no, we need the United Nations. We've got to have the Federal Reserve to regulate everything and this, that, and the other. And I asked him a few questions, and he was swimming. He had never been talked to about any of this stuff and had a degree from college. But they never even mentioned any of this stuff. He was stuck. I said, where's the Federal Reserve get their money? And I just started laying it out, and he was like, I don't know. I don't know that. Because they're not teaching our kids or our younger generations or my generation. I was never taught any of this stuff. I got most of my education on this stuff after high school. So we talked about the economics. Let's talk about the global politics. Gary Koss's book says that these same forces were promoting their agenda in the political realm as well. The Rothschilds, the Rockefellers, they're taking control of the economy and the politics, the ones that make the laws, that set the regulations, so they can control the American people. Donald Trump said in his victory speech last night, he said, this will forever be remembered as the day the American people regained control of their country. My original question was, who has been controlling the country? It's the establishment. They could have put Joe Biden in a nursing home and sent Kamala Harris back out to California, and America would have still been marching right along the agenda. How? The establishment's been running it for years. That's why they work so hard to try to keep Donald Trump from getting back in office, because he was working against the establishment. And it's very prophetic, because the Bible says in the end time, there's going to be a world government, a world religion, and a global economic sanctioning system established. We're watching the fulfillment of Bible prophecy as we speak. All of these individuals that I've mentioned today, they're part of the global government. They're the world establishment. So, Gary Koss says after 2 years of research, he was able to piece together a rough history of the Council on Foreign Relations development. So when you talk about some of these organizations here in the United States, that's part of the establishment. Council on Foreign Relations, Trilateral Commission, the Global Establishment, the Club of Rome, the Brookings Institute. There are many of them here in the United States. I think there's one called the Atlantic Council or something like that. There's many of them. They'll never come out right out and say, we're the establishment and we're trying to control America. They call them the Council on Foreign Relations. That sounds awesome, doesn't it? We do need a Council on Foreign Relations, don't we? But not one that's ran by the establishment. So the Council on Foreign Relations, the development and influence on the United States. And Gary Koss was hoping to gain an understanding of the organization's real purpose and mission. The history begins with the organization known as the Illuminati. You say, Dave, here you go with that conspiracy again. Folks, it's not conspiracy. This stuff is very real, and it's been running the establishment for years. The Illuminati, the beginning. Listen to this. The Illuminati, a secret Luciferian order founded in Ingolstadt, Bavaria, in Germany, May 1st of 1776. Man, that date sounds familiar, doesn't it? Our Declaration of Independence, July 4th, 1776, right? Well, the Illuminati was founded back then by a guy named Adam Weishaupt. He was a prominent Freemason, and the organization was an extension of these Illuminized Freemasonry, existing as a special order within an order. Its operations were closely connected with the powerful Grand Orient Masonic Lodge of France. And the order's name, meaning the enlightened one, the Illuminati, the enlightened ones, signified that its members had been initiated into the secret teachings of, here we go, Lucifer. And the Bible says that this entity, the dragon or Satan, will be give this entity its seat, power, and great authority. The supposed light bearers here, or source of enlightenment, according to the doctrines of Illuminized Freemasonry, the teachings of Lucifer. The Illuminati had been designed for one purpose. I'm going to hold right here because I want to make sure you hear this. I don't want to cut this in half, because this Illuminati stuff, it sounds crazy, I know. But if you want to know who's running the country, it's people that came from this. This is the origin of it. And man, I'm going to try to get through it before the end of the program, but you need to understand this stuff, what Donald Trump is facing in office. And so, very, very important. We're going to try to get through it before we get done with the program here. This pretty quick because I want to get through as much of it as I can, but according to Gary Koss' book, the Illuminati had been designed for one purpose: to carry out the plans of the high Freemasonry to create a new world order by gaining a foothold in the key policy-making circles of European governments and attempting to influence the decisions of Europe leaders from within through these advisory positions. Decent people tend to find it difficult to believe that there could be individuals, I'm quoting from Gary's book, everybody. Decent people tend to find it difficult to believe that there could be individuals so evil in nature as to actually try to take control of the world on behalf of Lucifer or Satan. this sounds like a theme that's more fitting for like a James Bond movie than real life. However, as difficult as it may be to believe, this effort to create a Luciferian New World Order, Gary Ka, and we've known this for years, is very, very real, everybody. Although the Illuminati officially ceased to exist after its exposure back in the 1780s, the continuation of its efforts would be ensured through the Grand Orient Lodge of France. Working through the Grand Orient and the network of Illuminized Masonic lodges already put in place by Weishaupt, high Freemasonry would continue with its plans to build a new world order. The United States had barely declared its independence when these same European forces began efforts to bring America's young banking system under their control. Alexander Hamilton, believed by some to have been an Illuminist agent, was at the forefront of that drive. President Thomas Jefferson, he was keenly aware of the plot, and he argued this. He said, if the American people ever allow private banks to control the issue of their currency, first by inflation and then by deflation, the banks and the corporations that will grow up around them will deprive the people of all property until their children wake up homeless on the continent that their fathers conquered. Now, Abraham Lincoln strongly resisted efforts by Illuminist forces to establish a privately controlled central bank. His foresight and wisdom would prevent the establishment of such a system for another 48 years. The problem is, shortly before his assassination, President Lincoln warned, as a result of the war, corporations have been enthroned and an era of corruption in high places will follow, and the money power of the country will endeavor to prolong its reign by working on the prejudices of the people until wealth is aggregated in the hands of a few and the republic is destroyed. I feel at this moment more anxiety for the safety of my country than ever before, even in the midst of war. President Lincoln said this just a little while before he was assassinated. He was coming against a central bank. In 1913, the persistent efforts of the Illuminized Freemasonry finally paid off with the creation of the Federal Reserve System. It all tracks back through these families, the Illuminized ones, Freemasonry, and it ensured European Illuminists, the Federal Reserve, a permanent role in America's economy, everybody, along with giving them more money with which to further their cause. Some of this money would eventually go toward financing the Council on Foreign Relations, whose formation was influenced by a man named Edward Mandell House. Colonel House, as he was called, was an Illuminist agent committed to the one world interest of the Rothschilds Warburg Rockefeller cartel, serving as their point man in the White House. And he first gained national prominence back in 1912 while working to get Woodrow Wilson nominated as president. After Wilson's election, he became the president's most trusted personal advisor. House was to Wilson like probably like Henry Kissinger would have been to Nixon, just attached to the hip, advisory position. And he was without question the dominant figure in the White House, exerting his influence particularly in the areas of banking and foreign policy. Well, his accomplishments as Woodrow Wilson's chief advisor, they were many. And among other things, he successfully persuaded Woodrow Wilson to support and sign the Federal Reserve Act into law. And later he realizing what he had done, President Woodrow Wilson, he remorsefully replied, "I have unwittingly ruined my country." During World War I, which began within the year after the Act's passage, House would make secret missions to Europe as Wilson's chief foreign diplomat. It didn't take long before he managed to drag the United States into war on April 1917. And as the war came to an end in 1918, House worked diligently to help plan the League of Nations. Because remember, the goal here is world government, right? Well, funded in part by the Rockefeller money, the League was to serve as the first political step towards the forming of this world governing body. President Woodrow Wilson, as a result of House's counsel, would become the leading spokesperson for the League of Nations, publicly viewed as the League's chief architect, in spite of the fact that House was really the one in charge. However, much of Wilson's his dismay, Woodrow Wilson, and his embarrassment, he couldn't even persuade the United States to join the organization. So the American people, they strongly resisted the move towards globalization, and it placed heavy pressure on Congress to reject the treaty and thereby keeping the U.S. out of the League of Nations. And of course, our non-entry, the non-entry of the United States into the League of Nations, represented a huge setback for Colonel House and the Internationalists. There could be no world government without the participation of the world's leading power, and the setback, however, proved to be only temporary. The globalists will learn from this experience and would never again underestimate the power of the American people or of Congress. To make sure that a similar incident didn't happen again, the second time around, this cartel, these private cartel of bankers, part of the establishment, working through House and his accomplices, would establish what's called the Council on Foreign Relations. Folks, the Council on Foreign Relations is the establishment in America. There are entities that are aligned with it, but the Council on Foreign Relations, its membership reads like kind of like a who's who in America, including most of the nation's top leaders in government, business, education, labor, the military, the media, and banking. You wonder why they all move in one direction at the same time, right? In addition to its headquarters in New York City, the Council on Foreign Relations has 38 affiliated organizations known as Committees on Foreign Relations located in major cities throughout the United States. You remember Rear Admiral Chester Ward? He was a former CFR member for 16 years. He warned the American people of the organization's intentions. The most powerful clique in the elitist group have one objective in common, he said. They want to bring about the surrender of the sovereignty and the national independence of the United States. And then there's a second clique of the international members of the CFR. It compromises the Wall Street or international bankers and their key agents. And primarily, they want the world banking monopoly from whatever power ends up in control of the government. But that's the problem. They can't get control of Donald Trump. And that's why all these people are going out of their mind, because he goes in and upsets their apple cart, and they built this system for hundreds of years, and then they get a guy that comes along and the American people says, we don't want the establishment running us. We signed a Declaration of Independence. We're supposed to be running off the Constitution. Dan Smoot, who was a former member of the FBI headquarters staff in Washington and one of the first researchers into the CFR, he said the ultimate aim of the Council on Foreign Relations is to create a one-world socialist system and make the United States an official part of it. This course would be done in the name of democracy, right? Folks, the CFR, the Council on Foreign Relations, and all their entities, that's the establishment. Not only does it have influence and power in key decision-making positions at the highest levels of the government to apply pressure from above, but it also finances and uses individuals and groups to bring pressure from below to justify the high-level decisions for converting the United States from a sovereign constitutional republic. Hear what I said again. The United States is a sovereign constitutional republic, and they're designed to turn it into a servile member state of a one-world dictatorship. This establishment. Now, I could go into a more detail than you'd ever probably want to know on all this stuff. The reason for my program today is when it came about that President Biden was really showing his cognitive decline, and they kind of set him up for the debate back in June, real early for a debate, because they wanted to have time to get him out of the way and prop up Kamala Harris and let her, and to really be able to push her and advertise her and all these other things, which it failed miserably. But a lot of people were saying, who's running the country? I saw it in the news all over the place. Who's really running the country? Easy answer. The same people that have been running it for well over 100 years. These people, the Council on Foreign Relations and many of these others, have groomed politicians to take these positions so they could retain power. It's how they've been running the country for decades and decades and decades. Now, you have an individual who was elected last evening, going to be the 47th president of the United States, coming into office, and unless it just, some kind of demonic intervention or something, I don't know, he'll be inaugurated on January 20th, 2025. He is against this establishment, what I've been talking to you about today. So, do we as Christians, do we need to say, okay, I'm done with that. He got elected. Now, Trump, do your job, and I'm going to sit back? No. We still need to pray because we want him to get a lot of these things done that he promised, right? To make it better for Americans and our life here in America, right? And it can be. America is the greatest nation on the planet, right alongside Israel. But he won't be able to do a lot of things because there's an enemy. His name is Satan, and he's setting up a kingdom here on the earth. And he's going to be pushing against what Trump's trying to do. He's going to still be pushing his LGBTQ agenda and the open borders and all this stuff. And we've got somebody in the office now who's going to be pushing against that. He's pushing against the establishment of a world governing body and the establishment, period. Now you know just a treetop version of who the establishment is. It's been happening for years. There's a religious element behind it as well. So, thank God for what happened last night, right? And I hope that he's able to continue all 4 years and get everything done that he promised, because it will be wonderful. But we certainly need to be praying. The fight's not over with. There's still an enemy, a very big, powerful enemy. But the Bible says greater is in he that's in me and he that's in the world. God's on our side, everybody.